A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Hey, let's try and get our heads around a Christian attitude to life, not just in theory, but in practice. When we think of children, there is their reference to God's creative love and a sacred gift with eternal significance. Well, I suspect our conversation today will extend to what for many may even be a controversial conversation, even connecting the issues of how we do family and the use of contraception and the evil of abortion. Well, the powerful abortion lobby is relentless in their push to make abortion easier, cheaper and more convenient. It's an industry that Christians with a biblical view of the world choose not to support. But what about our attitudes to the size of family? Is there a Christian position on that? How many children is enough? Well, a conversation today about being open to life. Kathy Clubb is a pro-life advocate. She works with Endeavour Forum. She's editor of the E-News Forum. Kathy endured relentless legal action when she tried to hand out a pamphlet to a couple entering an abortion clinic back in 2016. Her legal battle went all the way to the High Court, where she lost the case, arguing that abortion laws were unconstitutional, and the High Court ultimately dismissed any appeals. And Kathy continues to be a pro-life advocate. Kathy Clubb, I might say, a very special welcome back to 2020.
Oh, thanks for having me, Neil. It's great to be here.
Kathy, we might talk some more about your history, but let's come straight to our topic today. Let's start with perceptions as to whether Australians are open to life or closed to life. When you think of that, where does your mind go?
Oh, I would say that the evidence is definitely there that Australians are not open to life. Our population is ageing and it's falling, and it's only because we have such an influx of migrants that it's kind of covering up the falling birth rate that we have.
You know, nobody likes to talk about it. We're not seeing that on the news headlines, are we, when we talk about a falling birth rate and the reason why we have to have so much immigration in order to keep our economy afloat? There is a big issue in there that somehow or other is swept under the carpet, isn't it?
It has been until recent times. I have seen mainstream media starting to report on it, but we're basically at the point where it's almost too late to reverse the trend now.
Too late to reverse the trend, and, if you're going to refire up the trend, and I imagine this is where our conversation may well end up going today, and we might steer it in that direction. How do you reverse the trend? So is there a solution that's having a Christian heartbeat or a Christian view of the world has to the dynamics of the changing culture that comes with huge numbers of immigration? Hey, let's just come clean on something here. Denominational affiliations here. You're Catholic.
Yes,
I'm Protestant.
I'm Roman Catholic.
I'm Protestant, and but we're both Christian, followers of Christ, interested in God's heart for families. And so when you're talking families, you do have to talk about the issue around abortion. You do have to talk about the issue around immigration. All of this is somehow rather intertwined, and in a conversation that so many people are almost afraid to have. Altogether, as Christians, we understand, Kathy, that there is something deeper about life that we need to reflect on from time to time.
Oh, I absolutely agree, Neil. And it's true, your comment at the beginning is true, that this is a very controversial topic among Christians. And I've come up against it before in Christian circles. And just as a bit of a context, most Catholics actually believe in the use of contraception these days, despite it officially not being acceptable in the church. So Catholics are not immune to this cultural trend toward having small families, unfortunately. I've noticed that in the more traditional parishes and in the more traditional Protestant denominational parishes or groups, there's much more openness to life, many more bigger families.
Okay, so if we're talking about being open to life, and, I pick up here something in my preparation for our conversation, these words, open to life. It's a little more prevalent in the Catholic Church, Protestants tend not to be talking about open to life. We sort of take for granted that there's a choice around the size of our family. In as you say, more traditional Catholic circles, where contraception is in some sense outlawed, you've got large Catholic families. And sometimes, you find someone with a large family and it's almost a little bit of a throwaway line. It's, it must be Catholic. But sometimes just getting our head around that, actually that may be a good thing. I wonder if you've got any perception around that. Kathy, have you got your own family? Have you got I don't know if you want to let us in on your own circumstances, and I didn't sort of prepare you for that, but is there something personal you can share about your own family?
Well, I have 13 biological children,
wow,
including one set of twins and 14 grandchildren as well. Right. So that's I've put my money where my mouth is, you might say.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah. 13 children. And and so you are what you'd call coming from a traditional Catholic family background. Does this reflect same for your siblings, your parents, coming from a sort of Catholic lineage here?
No, I'm really the only one of my generation that's taken this mandate seriously. My parents were influenced by what some people call a revolution in the Catholic Church that happened in the 1960s, and they don't have that same mindset that a big family is necessarily a good thing. But I did just want to point out something, Neil, about historically all the Christian churches were against the use of contraception. It's only been in the last 100 years that there's been a change. And that really all came about in 1930 in England at the Lambeth Conference of the Anglican Church, when it was the first time that the bishops allowed Anglican couples to what they called follow their consciences. So up until that moment, every single Christian denomination felt the same way, that contraception was evil.
Okay, and our last conversation that we just had, we were talking about Catholics and Protestants, interestingly, in that one too, and we didn't set it up specifically, but talked about a top-down hierarchical sense, which you have in the Catholic Church, whereas Protestant churches tend to be a whole lot flatter. In other words, you want to be able to rely on the scriptures and your own research there to be able to establish something of where your conscience might go on big issues, like the fact that we're created in the image and likeness of God and how that might overflow into our own attitudes of family. It's not so much that there's someone up a hierarchy who's dictating what we should do, but wanting to hear from God and perceive what that truth might be. There is a sense there in which you say, well, somehow or other, the Roman Catholic hierarchy might have dropped the ball too in leaving big families open to everyone's conscience. I mean, I'm not getting you to criticise your own church here, but that might be the case that you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. It's true. When Pope Paul VI put out an encyclical during the 60s, it was called Humanae Vitae, and it was about being open to life and rejecting abortion, contraception, and so on. And he predicted a lot of the consequences that we would see if Christians would start using contraception, and those things have come to pass, that women would be objectified, and he didn't even see the porn culture that we are faced with now. But he predicted that it would not be good for women if this mindset was allowed to creep in, that it was fine to separate the conjugal act from creating children. So when he did that, and he did a lot of things that I don't agree with, but this encyclical was good because it confirmed what all Christians had always believed. But there was a huge backlash from a lot of the hierarchy at that time. It was shameful that many bishops told their dioceses and their congregations, you don't have to listen to this. So it was a real rebellion that took place all over this one issue that is, even within the church, was and is still controversial. But I thought, you made me think, you mentioned scripture, right at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, God said to Adam and Eve, increase and multiply and fill the earth. So that's the initial mandate right at the beginning of Genesis to all Christians, all men, in fact.
Be fruitful and multiply, increase and multiply. Yes, there's not necessarily a removal there, is there, in what would be a a cultural mandate. That's part of the cultural mandate, that is something for us all to be mindful of. Now, when we talk about Protestants in the mix here, you've come clean on where Catholics are at. Protestants have typically taken this thought that the Bible doesn't say anything more specific about things like contraception, and therefore it is left to consciences. As you say, where the Catholic Church left it to everyone's conscience, there's something in Protestant churches where there's a conscience focus as well. And if I might even introduce a word into there, stewardship in the Protestant way of thinking about families. What do you think about stewardship in all of that? You know, if I was asking you, and maybe that even needs more unpacking and explanation, but the idea of a stewardship of your family, recognizing you have resources, there are health issues, family life, physical, emotional, financial, all of these sorts of things that the believer also has a responsibility in stewardship when they're thinking about the size of family. Any thoughts from you around that?
Yes, there are. And, the thing about God is that he doesn't put us in a position where there's there's no solution. He doesn't try to make things so difficult for us that there's no solution. And so he has created our bodies, the female body, with certain patterns so that there are infertile times that can be used by the couple if they have a really genuine reason for avoiding having children. So there's a whole, natural fertility control philosophy out there, and lots of help for people who either want to fall pregnant and can't, or for some serious reason should not fall pregnant. So that's there for Christians and anyone to be able to use if they need to, the natural fertility control. But the problem is with human beings, we're selfish. We all are tainted by original sin. We all have a tendency to want to put ourselves first. And this makes it very difficult when it comes to discerning the size of a family and how much, how the resources are going to be shared and so on. So this is why I think it's very good to have in mind to counter that, being open to life and generous, this sense of generosity that can counter all of our selfishness that might creep in there when we're trying to discern the size of our families.
Interesting, isn't it, to have a big picture idea of the size of a family when you're struck with cost of living crisis and the thought that, things are so hard, I'll never be able to even buy a house. Therefore, I maybe will limit my family. These sorts of things are issues, no doubt, that go on in the minds of lots and lots of people. There's lots of reasons not to have a bigger family. But I guess if we're talking about the value of life, and if we're talking about, the whole issue that we want to talk about today is being open to life, somehow or other you want to have a bigger picture, and in some sense, that's a trust in God, because, all good things about the Catholic view of having a big family, because it's all about trust in God, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if we're saying that we have faith, and then we're going to say, well, we actually don't trust God will help us, if we have a third child or a fourth or a fifth or whatever people are thinking about, then that's not consistent. If you really have faith, then you will let God decide. I believe firmly that's the ultimate thing to do, is to let God decide how many children are going to come into this family. And obviously, for most people, it will not be 13. Most people the combined fertility of most couples is not to allow for 13 children. So people shouldn't be thinking automatically that's what's going to happen to me. Many people just can't have that many children anyway, even if they would like to. So that's something everybody needs to remember.
Well, you've clearly got a gift, Kathy, 13 biological children. That's amazing, and let me honour you for that. Hey, the Australian birth rate tells its own story, doesn't it? Because I think it's relatively the latest figures. They might be a year old, but 1.481 births per woman. I think that's the average number of children for an Australian woman that she'll have over her lifetime. 1.481. It's a big contrast to 13. clean. Give us your thoughts on what sort of story that's telling about Australians, maybe not so much in the religious context, but across because, while we might actually align with a religious dimension, we're all influenced, aren't we, by the very secularised nation that our nation has moved in. What sort of story is it telling us when we're looking at that number of births per woman?
Well, I think it's very sad because it's telling us that if that's the average, then there must be a lot of women not having any children at all, mustn't there? If you've got plenty that are still having 3, 4 and upwards, and then the birth rate's under 2, how many are choosing to not have any? So to me, that says something about what people think about marriage for a start. What do they think the function of marriage is and the role of marriage is? But that is getting into the more Christian side of it. But I think the more people are thinking that it's fine to not be open to life, the more selfish our whole culture is going to become. And you see it in the media. It's all about self-care, and there's something reasonable about self-care as well, obviously, but this push holidays and luxury items and having a house before you're even married, and it's got to be a great house and it's got to be a big house and you need certain cars, and all of that thing goes together. And even things as mundane as car parks tell a story, because it's very difficult to get a big van into a car park and maneuver it in there and park it. And people who have a big family have a big van. So that's just a practical response to the birth rate.
I mentioned a little earlier, I said, Kathy, let us in on your own family. Kathy has 13 children. If I'm coming clean and she's coming from a Catholic position, if I'm coming from a Protestant position, I have 4 children. And you might have your own thoughts here on what the perfect size of a family might be, because the statistics tell the story of Aussies having 1.4 children. That statistic, how do you have 1.4? Well, that's all a statistic, obviously. Hey, 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Kathy, if we're talking, let's get into really deep water here. Dee from Tasmania sent us a text, and for listeners, listen carefully. A lack of education, Dee says, about the abortifacient action of contraception and intrauterine devices. Christians don't understand they are conceiving and the baby cannot implant in the womb. Dee sent that through. When we talk about different forms of contraception, there's going to be those that are prophylactic, and then there are those that are abortifacient. Any thoughts for you around what Dee is saying there, Kathy?
Oh, yeah, it's a great point, and thanks, Dee, for bringing that up. The abortifacient contraceptives should absolutely never be used by Christians because they're killing babies. And a woman could have up to 12 abortions a year without even realizing it if she's using the pill or IUD or any other form of hormonal contraception. So that's a no-brainer, you might say, for Christians, or it should be.
And, I suspect, there could be a perception, what are you dictating here? But I think you've got no intention of putting a rod across anyone's back or making people feel particularly guilty. It's about the decisions we might make for the future that might be very important here. Because when we think of contraception, even back in the olden days, Kathy, when people were taking a contraceptive pill, stopping the implantation of that embryo in the uterus, when people were thinking of contraception, even by way of a prophylactic, using a condom, these days, people are thinking of contraception and taking the RU486 as a form of contraception, and it is literally known as the morning after pill, the abortion pill. People have now got to a point where they're thinking of taking pills, and abortion is just like a form of contraception. Things have gone really radically bad, haven't they, with that sort of thinking?
Yeah, well, there's a relationship in the mindset, the contraceptive mindset and the abortion mindset, that we just don't want any children no matter what. So it's really a slippery slope, I suppose you could say. And I know there are lots of Christians listening who would never desire an abortion at all. They would run away from that. But perhaps they haven't been told by their doctor that one of the functions of hormonal contraception is to create an abortion if the baby has already been conceived. So I believe there are lots of people out there who do not know of the abortifacient possibility of these forms of contraception. So that's the first thing. And I don't want to judge anyone because, I mean, we all do things that we're not proud of, and we all make mistakes, and all of us are basically going in the right direction, but we're going to make mistakes along the way. So if I can help people to look at the choices that they've made in their lives and talk to their spouse about it and just, really think these things through and see where their trust in God is, look at the physical side of it if it's a matter of hormonal contraception, do the research, and then kind of see if you do have something there is along the same mindset that people who have abortions think. For example, when people have an abortion, they say things like, we can't handle any more children. We can't afford another child. We're not ready for children. We need to finish our studies. We're going to give our small family the best things in life, and so on. And they're the same reasons that people use for using contraception. So I think we really need to get that relationship between the two things straight.
We'll often on this program talk about all of the ways that our ethics stand on the fact that we're created in the image and likeness of God. We are a pro-life people. Christians are pro-life. People who have a cursory reading of the Bible will discover that we're created in the image and likeness of God right from the very first chapter in Genesis. Life has value because we're created in His image and likeness. It's not ours to take, and it is a slippery slope when we're making all sorts of decisions that leave that understanding of being created in His image off on the sidelines. Come back to what I think is an important point that we need to be able to touch on, the idea that the biggest abortion providers today actually started out as contraception providers. What do you think of when you're thinking about the way things evolve from bad to worse?
I think it's really significant, Neil, because it's no coincidence that both Marie Stopes International and Planned Parenthood, two of the biggest abortion providers in the whole world, both started out as contraceptive-only providers. So Marie Stopes started what became Marie Stopes International in Britain, and Margaret Sanger started what began Planned Parenthood in the United States. Both of those women were into eugenics. They did not want poor people to have babies. They did not want black people to have babies, or the people that they called feeble. So just the lower classes. Were trying to eradicate births among what they called these feeble people. So it started in a very bad place. And both of those women were actually opposed to abortion. They didn't like abortion. They weren't what you would call pro-life activists in the sense that we think of it now, but they certainly weren't out there promoting abortion. They thought, let's get everybody contracepting and then they won't need to have abortions. But it didn't work that way, and their legacy is these huge abortion providers. So I think that makes the connection very, very clear.
And I think just to come back and reinforce, this is not a Catholic versus Protestant thing anymore. The way Catholics think about it, the way Protestants think about it. As you indicated a little earlier, a lot of Catholics are ignoring what directives might come from the hierarchy of the Catholic Church around these issues. Protestants who've made their own decisions and based on their own conscience and exercising wisdom have, I'm just maybe tarring everyone at the same brush, but tend to have smaller families and increase use of contraception and not have a larger family for the same sorts of reasons, exercising conscience. When we talk about the Catholic versus Protestant idea, there is a sense, isn't there? Catholics and Protestants are on the same page being pro-life, just that sometimes we don't always get into a conversation that takes us into a little bit deeper understanding of what all of this might mean.
Yeah, I think this is something that all Christians should be agreeing on. I just think it's a really fundamental principle. As you say, seeing people made in the image of God, that is our starting point when it comes to size of families and trusting God and so on. But the thing that we have in common is that we don't have children so much for this life. Children are for eternity. We're bringing new souls into the world that we hope will get to heaven, and we want to help them get to heaven. And it's our, we have that obligation to bring them up and train them according to the ways of the Lord. So we should, I just can't see why we're not all on the same page about that, honestly. And I just thought I might mention one thing that people may not realise about Marie Stopes. So she was the contraceptive promoter back in the 19th century into the 20th century in England. It was actually Marie Stopes who pressured the bishops in England to change their stance on contraception. So I said before, 1930 was the Lambeth Conference. Only 10 years previously, the bishops had completely rejected birth control. But Marie Stopes went on a mission between 1920 and 1930 to change their minds on this. And so it was largely her influence that got the bishops to change their mind. So it's a pretty interesting fact.
And that might even lead us to the thought that we want bishops to have a biblical understanding rather than be influenced by industrial pressure. Hey, economics and culture, we mentioned a little earlier, the reason why we have such immigration numbers now, and we're all sort of, almost trembling at the fact that so many are coming and changing the culture of Australia. There's two ways of looking at that. You could say that's actually a good thing missionally, and you can say that, unraveling what was a fabulously founded Christian culture that may have some issues. There's different ways that different religious groups look at these things. Muslims have a different idea altogether, don't they? I mean, they've got a sort of a top-down structure around having big families. And, when we think of Christians and voting to have smaller families, how do you think about the contrast there? Is that something you think about, Kathy?
Yes, certainly traditionally Muslims have larger families. Some of them are embracing the culture when they move into Western societies and deciding to limit. But, some you could say it's a form of conquest, trying to establish the Muslim religion in a culturally by having a lot of children in their new homes, like in Australia. But there are other faiths too who traditionally were against contraception. Some Hindus, Buddhists, Orthodox Jews, and so on. So it isn't only Muslims that have that philosophy that they hold on to. But can I just mention one point about the top-down thing? The way a Catholic approaches this idea of hierarchy is that we believe that God gave us the model of hierarchy for the church. So God is a hierarchy, and he established man to fit into this hierarchical structure. And so we don't really, as a Catholic, I don't have any problem with the hierarchical nature of the church. And I also don't believe that it's just a bunch of men who decided some things and we have to go along with it. That's not the Catholic understanding of the rules in the church. We believe that it is scriptural, even though we're going to disagree on, interpretations of scripture and so on. But we believe that when the church mandates something, it's because they truly believe that God mandated that thing. It's not a human decision. So I thought I'd just bring that point up.
Okay, you raise a really important point by reflecting on the Catholic side of hierarchy, and you raise the very important point that pastors might well have a role in the way that people within their care, and I'm not saying people within their control, because people are not under the control of their pastor. You're really not under the control of your priest. You're firstly under God, but we have pastors who are over us. So what is being stated from the pulpit may be very important here, and I'll get your thoughts, because if we think wrongly about the size of our families and even down to some of the nitty-gritty when it comes down to contraception, we might want to seek a little bit of wisdom from those that we entrust to be able to point us in the right direction, our pastors, our priests. What are your thoughts here about the value and just how important the pulpit is when it comes to these sorts of issues of being pro-life?
It's extremely important. A pastor is a shepherd. That's what it means. So we're like the sheep, and we need some guidance. And a priest or a pastor might say something that we disagree with, but, that's human as well. But we don't have to slavishly follow what they say, but they should be guiding us with biblical principles and with the listening and reading and reproducing the teachings of the fathers of the church as well. There's doctors and saints throughout the ages who've had wisdom of their own, and all of these things should be brought up and put towards congregations. And, all the pro-life issues really do need to be spoken about within the churches. And it's a great failing, I think. I think it's a place where we have failed, because the pastors have basically a captive audience where they can say, look, this is how we should be acting. It doesn't have to be pointing the finger at anyone. It doesn't have to be accusing. But I think there's a place for actually honing people's consciences. The pulpit should be a place for that.
And, just bearing some responsibility for a conversation like this today, because while I never like to tar all pastors and priests with the same brush of saying they've failed in some way, because every conversation I have is one of those conversations that, should be had more and more in the church. And, of course, there just isn't time. But there is time on a program like this where we get to explore and take things a little deeper. And you know what? Even if we get it wrong, we've actually sown a seed of thinking about these issues in our own hearts and in our own devotional time, in our own study time, about where these things might sit ultimately for our plan for the future. Hey, come back to the size of family, because we don't have a lot more time. It's not just about economics, but God is in the mix there. I think this is where Catholics and Protestants can certainly be on the same page. God is in the mix of our family. He's got a plan for our family, and we don't want to hinder his plan. We want to be able to work hand in hand with him in that. How do you reflect on that?
I think there's a great place for providence in our lives, and many Christians understand providence in certain contexts and to a certain degree. But I think that also relates to our family size, and trusting that, yes, if God does want you to have another baby, he will provide the resources for you. And we mustn't worry, and we must take the first step in being open and then just wait on God. Not have him supply everything we need first before we say, okay, we think we can have another baby now. I think we really need to have that trust and be open and be prepared for some sacrifices. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that, I wasn't, some heiress or something that had unlimited funds and that's why I could have a lot of children. It was never like that. There will be sacrifice involved. But God sees that, and God acknowledges that. And at the end of your life, we're all going to have to stand before God. And he's not going to ask us about how many ministries and campaigns and things we're involved in. He's going to say, did you have all the children that I wanted you to have? He's going to say that to every one of us, Neil. And that's one thing I'll be able to say to God when I stand before him. Oh, yes, I did actually, Lord, I did. I know there'll be lots of other areas that I will have failed in, and I'll have to acknowledge those. But that's one thing I will be able to say to him. And I hope that all Christians can do that.
And interesting little contrast dimension there. And of course, very generalised, even as you say, what Catholics believe or what Protestants believe. You've got Protestants who might argue that the family size can influence all sorts of things, including the pursuit of, your vocational calling or your ministry or even a call to missions. And the Catholic side of the argument is that family is the primary calling, and being open to the family calling might take priority even over other elements of ministry and missions. But that's, that is in the deep waters there. Hey, one last query from a listener on a text from an anonymous person who says, is IVF an acceptable way to create life? Now, this might be a whole conversation for another day, for another whole hour, but
unfortunately, IVF has so many ethical problems. There are actually more abortions caused through IVF than there are, more deaths of babies caused through IVF than there are through abortion. It's very sad, because you sympathise with the people who can't have babies, and you want them to be able to use technology. But this whole thing it's such a can of worms, as you say, Neil. Unfortunately, it's just not ethical. It's quite immoral.
You know, there are no easy answers, are there, when it comes to issues around IVF, which may well be the dream come true for a couple struggling with infertility or with loss, and very sensitive and mindful of all of the different positions here, that there's going to be someone in a conversation like this who could be offended. My thought is, please don't be offended, but enjoy the fact that we can have a conversation like this and we can bring Christian dimensions to it. And just the fact that we've got a Catholic and a Protestant here in this conversation, that's actually a pretty powerful thing. But to recognise that within the Catholic Church, there are going to be people with different positions, and in the Protestant side, there are, different positions sometimes that evangelicals take to mainline Protestants, that different ones to take than Reformed traditions. There are some differences you can break down where people have traditionally been. But this is the challenge, isn't it? To come before God, and these days perhaps easier to study than ever. Even in the use of AI, to use that to ask questions about facts and figures, that can lead you into some understanding of what's going on factually, and then, of course, before God spiritually, as to how you might understand the issues around family. I wanted to talk about things like, the perfect size of a family, and with your 13 children, Kathy, you're going to say 13's probably not even enough. And I have 4.
The perfect size is the number God wanted you to have.
Yeah, the number that God wants you to have, and that actually has some allowance for stewardship in there. And as we mentioned a little earlier, hey, just one last text from Deb, and I haven't even pre-read it. So from Deb in Clare in South Australia, so interesting, Neil. I've been blessed with 9 gorgeous children, 40 down to 25. God always looked after us and provided. We don't have lots of material stuff, but we have what matters in life, each other. Thank you for your program. Thanks so much for that, Deb, and I think you're probably going to concur. That's a good one. And Deb didn't say whether she's Catholic or Protestant in there. She sounds a bit Catholic to me, but she might well be Protestant.
It's not, well, that's probably a bit biased. There are plenty of Protestant families who are large and who are open to life. Yeah.
Yes, there are. And I think that the essence of our conversation today, being open to life and understanding what that means, even when we think about our family and our future. And wonderful getting your insights today. It's been a tremendous conversation, I think, Kathy, and there might be listeners who want to get a hold of the podcast of this one a little bit later on and listen to some of the finer points that you raised a little earlier in our conversation. Kathy Clubb is a pro-life advocate. She works with Endeavour Forum. She's the editor of the e-News Forum, and you'll be able to subscribe to that. Endeavourforum.org is the website, endeavourforum.org. And, it'll have a Catholic flavour to it. But Kathy, as you can hear, sensitive to all sides, has faith in Christ, and really pulls no punches, tells it like it is, and sometimes we want someone just to be a straight shooter on these things. Hey, Kathy, thank you so much for taking some time to share these thoughts with us today on 2020.
Oh, you're most welcome, Neil. Thanks for having me. And I'd love to hear any feedback on this conversation.
Yes, connecting with you via that website, endeavourforum.org.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.